So hi. So let's get into question number 5 of CA Intermediate mock test paper for Jan exams. Um, Question A. Fraudulent financial reporting often involves management override of controls that otherwise may appear to be operating effectively. Explain the techniques used to commit fraud by management overriding controls. Okay. So first of all, being the intelligent kid that you are, you need to first state that management override of controls is difficult for the auditor to detect as compared to an employee based fraud, mainly because management has got sophisticated access to most of the controls of the organization. Okay, so management has got this access to tweak or to make corrections or to alter records. So lot of high level sophisticated accesses the management has got, which any other employee of the organization would not have. So hence it is difficult for the auditor to detect a fraud done by the management as compared to by an employee on the company. So now the techniques by which management override controls. So let's take one example. There is an organization. This organization, you are preparing now the financials for the period ending March 2021. The total revenue of the company is, say for example, 30 crores. The organization wants to boost its profits and show to the investors so that investors will be happy, share prices of the company will increase, the company will have a very good value in the market. For that, they want to boost the profits of the company, so they want to boost the revenue, the sales of the company. So what they are now trying to do, they now have a sales which was made in June 2021, which is pertaining to financial year 21-22. The management is trying to move this sale into the previous year so that the profits, the revenue will be inflated, the top line will be inflated, as a result the bottom line will also get inflated. Okay, they want to move only the sales and not the expense pertaining to that part. So what does the management do? For moving this sales, the management will take a lot of judgments. It will change a lot of documents. First of all, it is altering the sale document. The sale was actually conducted in June 2021. That document it is altering to sometime in March 2021 so that it gets pushed to the previous financial year. And also the assumptions it is changing, the key assumptions. Say for example, for any sale to happen, the risk and reward should get transferred from the seller to the buyer. Only then a sale is supposed to have happened. But in this particular case, the risk and reward transfer actually happened in June only. But here the management is getting into all the agreements, all the statement of works, all the POs with that particular vendor, reading line by line. Somewhere it is tweaking the statement, saying that at this point, even in March 2021 only, actually risk has got transferred. And they are tweaking that agreement part. They're tweaking that statement of work part. So all this they are tweaking. Now they're doing something like this. So now what happens? They are trying to alter the documents, they are trying to alter the records, they are trying to conceal the fact, they are trying to lie of the fact that actual sale happened only in June 2021. They are trying to conceal the fact that actual sale happened in only June 2021. They are trying to push it to March 2021. They are actually trying to recognize the revenue in an advanced manner. They are trying to advance the recognition of this revenue so that their bottom line will increase. They're also trying to record all these fictitious journal transactions whereby they're saying that yes, risk and reward has got transferred, so we are booking this sale now only. Even in March 2021 only we'll book for this sale. So now what happens? From this 30 crores of revenue, the revenue is now getting increased by this sale value. Say the sale value is about 15 crores. So it is getting increased, it is getting boosted to like 45 crores, whereas the actual revenue is only 30 crores. As a result, what is happening? Your profit is also getting increased because for the 15 crores, the underlying expense you're not transferring. You're transferring only the revenue part, taking some lame assumptions by changing the judgments, by tweaking the estimates, by altering the documents, by concealing facts from the auditor that the sale actually happened only next year. So simply this is all it. These are the techniques by which management override controls. Point number one, by recording fictitious journal transactions. Yes, as we saw, the sale which pertains to next year is being booked in current year. Inappropriately adjusting assumptions or changing judgments. The agreement says the sale is supposed to happen, the agreement starts only in June 2021, whereas they are trying to tweak the agreement in such a way, they are trying to change the assumptions of the agreement such that the risk and reward transfer actually happens in March 2021 only, so that revenue can be recognized in the previous year only. By this process, they are trying to advance the recognition. You can either, I mean, when management, if management decides to do, it can even omit the recognition part at all. For example, it wants to show high profits, so it is omitting an expense disclosure at all. It is not showing one particular expense recognition at all. It is advancing recognition of revenue, like in the current case that we are seeing. It is trying to delay the recognition of revenue. For example, the management is afraid that I'll have to pay higher taxes if I show this revenue in current period only. Let me push it to the next period. So they're trying to delay that recognition of revenue. That can also happen. And concealing or not disclosing full facts. Whatever the full facts, the management is not disclosing that to the auditor. For example, because of Corona, say one major unit of mine is locked down. It is completely locked. It is shut down. It makes up for more than 60 to 70% of my operations. In that case, it is going to cast a major doubt on your going concern. The management now decides that it is not going to disclose this to the auditor at all. The auditor says, no, I want to visit that place. Management is saying, no, now there is heavy floods, don't go to that place, it is risky, your life, your decision, we cannot say anything, but it is pure risk, that's what we can say. One of our employees also lost his life. All these stories the management will say, and somehow prevent the auditor from going there, because if he goes there, he'll know that it is going to question their going concern. So concealing or not disclosing actual facts. And engaging in complex transactions. Sometimes what management does is, in case there is a very straightforward, a vanilla transaction, 1 to 2, 2 to 1, if there is a transaction like this, it will be very easy for the auditor to understand it. So only to make it complex, what management will do is 1 to 1 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 7, 7 to 6, 6 to 5, and 5 to 2. So in this transaction, you need to understand all these legs to understand where it is actually coming. But the simple transaction is, if you net off all that, the simple transaction is 1 to 2. But they indulge in all these complex transactions just to make life complex, such that the figures which are forming part of the financial statements give a very wrong picture, or at least not the true picture. And finally, they alter records. You've seen a lot of cases where in certain IT companies, they have altered the employee records. They bring in a lot of new employees who are actually not there at all, but they'll pay in cash to these employees. All this payment will go somewhere to the management only. They'll show there are certain employees, say there are some 100 additional employees in books. They'll prepare ID cards, they'll prepare punch data, they'll prepare attendance sign, everything they'll prepare. But at the end, they'll also show as though from company cash payout is happening to these employees month on month, wages are being paid. But actually all this will once again get routed to the management only. These are altering records. So these are the techniques by which management override controls. Recording fictitious journal transactions, inappropriately adjusting assumptions or changing judgments, omitting, advancing or delaying recognition, concealing or not disclosing facts, engaging in complex transactions, and altering records. So next question number B of question 5 of mock text paper. The Comptroller and Auditor General shall be responsible for compiling the accounts of the Union and of each state from the initial and subsidiary accounts rendered to the accounts and audit and accounts offices under his control by treasuries, offices or departments responsible for keeping of such account. Explain. Dude, first of all, one thing I'll tell you, please write the spelling of Comptroller and Auditor General clearly. There are a lot of people who shrewdly write it as only CAG. There are also some kids who very lamely write it as Comptroller and Auditor General. Even the government of India will punish you if you write this spelling wrong. It is Comptroller and Auditor General. Okay. So the statement which is given here is very true, because these are all learned people. They are telling only true things. So first write the same sentence here. This question typically asks you to state what are all the responsibilities of the CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General. So you need to now write the responsibilities of CAG. Point number 1, the first responsibility of CAG is compiling the accounts of union and state. Okay, union is nothing but central government. State is nothing but states, all the states like Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra, Karnataka, all the states. So union and states, of all the states, it is CAG who will compile the accounts. So where will he compile? From the initial and subsidiary accounts rendered to the audit and accounts offices under his control. So from where will he get it? He'll get it from the initial and subsidiary accounts which are rendered to the audit and accounts offices which are under his control. From where will he get it? He'll get it from the treasuries, from the government offices, from the departments responsible for keeping up of this account. Okay, so all these central government offices, state government offices will keep all the accounts, they'll prepare all the accounts, they'll render it to the audit and accounts offices which are directly under the control of CAG, and they'll give all the initial accounts as well as subsidiary accounts. From this, the CAG will compile the accounts of union as well as the states. Before you write this answer, you need to understand one thing. You need to understand union. Union is nothing but center. So who is the head for center? It is the president of the country. Next, state. For every state, who is the head? Governor of the state. And third one is union territory having legislative assembly. Simply put it like our Delhi, Pondicherry, all these are places which have got a union, all these are union territories which have got a legislative assembly. So union territory having a legislative assembly. So who is responsible for this? The administrator. Okay. So just remember this: union, union president, state governor, UT having a legislative assembly, it is administrator. So responsibility number 2. The CAG shall be responsible for the computation and presentation of annual receipts and disbursements of union, each and every state, and all the union territories having legislative assembly. Okay. The next one. He shall submit accounts to the president of the union, governor of each state, and to the administrators of each union territory having a legislative assembly. So this, the CAG shall compile accounts. Then he shall be responsible for the computation and presentation of annual receipts and disbursements of each union, each state, and of each union territory having a legislative assembly. He shall submit these accounts to the president of union, to the governor of state, and to the administrator of union territories having legislative assembly. And the last point is, he shall be responsible for giving information or rendering assistance to union, state and union territory having legislative assembly in preparation of annual financial statements as and when they reasonably ask for. In case they are asking for support, dude, can you please support me? Then if they are asking, the CAG shall be responsible for giving them information and rendering assistance in the preparation of annual financial statements. There is also a note to this point. So what is that note? Here they are very specifically saying, just for our understanding, I have written it as PS. You can include this as a 5th point. The C&AG Act of 1971 has provisions for relieving him is nothing but the CAG, of his responsibility to give information and render assistance to union, state and union territory. So he shall give information as per point 4, but this particular act also gives him the leewage to, it also relieves him of the responsibility to give information and render assistance. Okay, so these are the points when you're asked about C&AG. So next point is on, give some examples of circumstances in which it is appropriate to prepare audit documentation relating to the use of professional judgment where the matters and judgments are significant. Simple. First, understand the question. The question says, dude, you are an article. You are going for an audit. You know some places where people are going to ask you, your partner, your audit manager, your seniors are going to ask you, no, where is your audit documentation for this? How did you arrive at this? How do you know this is right? They're going to screw you with a lot of questions in certain areas. Which are those areas? How do you identify those areas? Which are those areas? This is typically the question. Now let's read the question again. Give some examples of circumstances in which it is appropriate to prepare audit documentation relating to the use of professional judgment where the matters and judgments are significant. Okay, so 3 examples. It is a 3-mark question, so 3 examples. Situation number 1, where the requirement as per the auditor's conclusion is based on a requirement where the requirement says auditor shall consider certain information or factors. Okay. The statutory requirement, it says, no, I'm not taking any responsibility. The auditor shall consider certain information and factors. It says like that. And in this particular engagement that you're working in, these certain information and factors are very, very significant. In those cases, you'll definitely make it a point that you clearly prepare your documentation, because for whatever professional judgment that you're exercising there, it is very important that you have substantial documentation on the other end to prove that point. So first one is where it says the auditor shall consider certain information or factors. 2. The auditor's conclusion is based on the reasonableness of areas of subjective judgments. For example, you're preparing the FAR of the company, you're reviewing the FAR of the FAR, which is fixed asset register of the company. In that fixed asset register, the company, with respect to certain plant and equipment, it has taken useful life as 7 years. With respect to certain plant and equipment, the company has taken useful life as 10 years. And you are saying, yeah, this is okay, this is perfectly correct. Tomorrow your senior, your audit manager or your principal is coming and asking you questions. How do you decide all this? How do you know all this? How do you know that this is only 7 years useful life, this is only 10 years useful life? How did you derive at this? So when they ask this, you need to have proper documents to say that, sir, as per this part of the schedule relating to depreciation under Companies Act, it clearly says that this plant and equipment we can take useful life like this. And based on benchmarking, an industry in similar, a company in similar industry, similar business, they have taken like this, who are also coming under our audit. In that audit, we have taken like this. And similarly, the management, I have taken management representation letter and management's own explanation for this particular fact as to why they are considering this to be 7 years and why they are considering this part of plant and machinery to be 10 years. So you need to prepare clear documentation in those areas where it is based, your conclusion is based on reasonableness of areas of subjective judgments, like reasonableness of significant accounting estimates. Okay, the next one, the auditor's conclusion is based on a document where the auditor has got certain circumstances which push him with the reason to believe that the authenticity of document on the basis of which he has arrived at that conclusion may not be true. Okay. For example, in the company, they have given you certain bank statements. The bank statements, it doesn't look like you're preparing BRS, which is bank reconciliation statement. For that, they have given you base bank statements. The bank statements, you're not sure of the authenticity of the bank statement. In those cases, what all do you do? You write a mail from yourself to the bank saying that no, I want these bank statements. I want the statements from your end. And you also write to the head of the finance department, the CFO, saying that from your end only I want this bank statement. I want an MRL saying that this bank statement, whatever information furnished in this bank statement is true, this statement is authentic. So you start gathering so much of audit documentation too, because you are doubtful whether that bank statement, whichever the company has given you, is actually true or whether it is forged. You are not sure of that. Even you might go to a situation whereby you might ask the accounts manager to sit next to you, log into the bank statement, net banking system, and ask him to generate that bank statement in front of you only. All that you might do. So where you are arriving at certain conclusions on the basis of a certain document, but you've got reasons to believe and the circumstances are pushing you to think that, the auditor has got a reason to believe that the authenticity of the document may not be true. Okay, so jumping on to the next question. You're an auditor of PQR Limited, which has spent about 50 lakhs on research activities of a product during period under audit. The board of directors want to recognize it as an internally generated intangible asset. You need to advise them whether it can be recognized that way, and you also need to tell them the conditions necessary to be fulfilled to recognize intangible assets in financial statements. First of all, understand one thing. When you're doing research, it means that you're indulging in some sort of trial and error. Even you do not know what the result is going to be. Okay, you're not at all sure as to what it will turn out to. You're just trying to work out. You're just trying to do some trial and error basis. Let's do this, let's do that. You're also just learning that way. You're also experimenting. At that point, that is called the research phase. In that research phase, whatever you're doing, you cannot recognize it as an asset at all. It can be only recognized as an expenditure in the P&L account of the company. Why it cannot be recognized as an asset? Because you cannot prove that there is going to be probable future economic benefits which is going to flow out of that expenditure. Okay, So clearly put it, no intangible asset arising from research or from the research phase of an internal project shall be recognized as an asset. Expenditure on research shall be recognized as expense only and not as an intangible asset, as the entity cannot demonstrate probable future economic benefits from such expenditure. You can recognize something as an asset only when you can prove that, only when you can demonstrate that there is going to be future probable economic benefits which are going to flow to the entity from that asset, from that expenditure. So now what are the conditions on the basis of which intangible asset can be recognized? Condition number one, asset should be identifiable. For example, let's take a case. A big company is taking over, is acquiring a small company. This small company has got a good market base for itself. It has got a good base of customers. It has got a good base of vendors who are ready to give products to this company at a lesser price as compared to market price. So all these benefits this company is enjoying, the small company is enjoying. And there is a big company which is acquiring the small company. So in those cases, when this big company is acquiring the small company, this big company is also acquiring the goodwill of the small company. Okay, goodwill is nothing but whatever is a goodwill, that whatever is a market reputation that the small company has earned for itself in the market, whether amidst customers as well as amidst vendors who are ready to give this company at a lesser price. So first, the asset should be identifiable. Here in this case, you are clearly able to identify that the small company has got for itself certain assets in the, certain goodwill in the form of a good customer base as well as a good base of vendors who are ready to give products to this company at a cheaper price. Next, the entity shall control the asset. Now that the big company has taken over the small company, the big company has got control over the goodwill of the small company. Goodwill in the sense what? Control over the customer base of the small company, control over the vendor base of the small company. Next, future economic benefits associated with the asset shall flow to the entity. Because this big company is now controlling over the small company, has taken over the small company and has got control over its goodwill, all the future economic benefits which are going to flow from the customer base of the small company, which are going to flow in the form of cheaper purchase price from the existing vendor base of the small company, all is going to come to this big company. So the future economic benefits associated with the asset shall flow to the entity. Okay. Last one is cost of the asset can be reasonably measured reliably. So the small company, when I'm taking over this, I'm going to measure what is your customer base. So today you've got a month-on-month sales of say 1 crore in the market. So the goodwill which I'm taking over is worth about 1 crore because you've got a customer base of 1 crore. So here you should be able to measure the cost of this asset reliably. Okay, you should have documents on this hand saying that these are the customer base. Month-on-month customer base, the sales is this much. Average of last 3 years it works out to this much. So maybe I can take it as 1 crore per month as 1 crore as my goodwill on account of taking over this small company. So what are the 4 conditions on the basis of which you can recognize an intangible asset? 1, the asset should be identifiable. 2, the entity shall control the asset. 3, future economic benefits flowing from the asset shall flow to the entity controlling the asset. 4, cost of the asset shall be can be measured reliably. Okay.